It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast, to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 49, a few things I want to let you guys know about. I want to make sure to shout out Grind Clothing Co. They are our official merch sponsor, and you can find bucket hats like this for sale with this awesome Revved Up logo. You can find hats a lot like the one Ryan is wearing into today's episode. And then you have sweatshirts to choose from like this one. This one is my personal favorite design. Me and Ryan wear this sweatshirt a lot. Make sure to go cop yourself a sweatshirt, bucket hat, or hat using the link in the description of this video or the link in our YouTube bio. That will shoot you right to Grind Clothing Co.'s website, where you have a plethora of designs and clothing items for you to choose from. There's also some zip-up hoodies with that Revved Up design. That's one of my personal favorites too. Also, I want to make sure you guys like and subscribe. This podcast is growing and we want to continue to grow, so that is where you guys come in. So make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. Also, there's an arrow button below this video. That's the share button. You can share to your Snapchat stories, to your Facebook pages, to fellow friends on Instagram and Facebook. So if you like our podcast and you think you have friends or family or other Pistons fans that you think would like this podcast, make sure to hit that share button so that more people get to know about your favorite Detroit Pistons podcast, Revved Up 906. Without further ado, episode number 49. This week, we are going to talk about the question, can the Pistons be dominant on the defensive end this season? And there's a couple reasons why we want to address this. Is just last Monday, the team, the players, the coaches, the GM, Troy Weaver, talked with the media. And one of the things Troy Weaver said is, quote, "We aren't the Pistons until we defend," end quote, which is so very true for multiple reasons, because we saw the three championships we won, the main core things with those teams was defense and being stout in the passing lane and in the paint. And then also we saw in the East this year, the Celtics and the Boston Celtics and the Milwaukee Bucks rather upgrading their rosters. We just saw the Milwaukee Bucks trade for Damian Lillard, the Boston Celtics bringing in Drew Holiday. The beasts of the East are getting better each and every season, and the Pistons, if they want to start flirting with competing with these Eastern Conference teams at the top tier, they have to be able to start with defense. Now let's talk about realistically where the Pistons were at last year defensively and where they have to be this year. Ryan, start us off with breaking down this topic.
So when you look at the Pistons defense from last year, granted, it's not a fair comparison to this season and what we can expect, or even years past. Last year was just one of those years where it doesn't really matter, but it does at the same time.
Right.
Because when you break down who we had out there, Cade obviously wasn't playing. From time to time, you wouldn't have Marvin Bagley, Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey, Bojan. Yeah. Like, our entire team almost didn't play a whole season last year. We were missing out on a lot of them. And so our defensive rating-wise and everything and where it goes is, yeah, it was not good. We had probably one of the worst defensive ratings in years past that we've had at a 4.1. That is not good at all. But it's not good in the sense of when you compare that to the last couple of years, even before last year. If you look at 2021, we were at a 1.8. That's actually pretty darn good defensively compared to where we were at 4.1. But in just the breakdown of our defense, when you had guys like Bojan Bogdanovic, just throwing out names, not that I need to name anybody in particular, but you had Bojan just constantly fouling as soon as he got blown by. You have just countless other guys just looking to foul rather than defend. And it's kind of like one of those things where it's not helping you at all. Just don't foul. It's not hard to not foul, realistically. But that's a part of the growing pains. That's what happens when you have a young team. And this year, we're definitely going to take the jump in the sense of where if you were to compare this year's past team to this year's upcoming team, it's much different. We have more vet players. We have just our young guys are more established in the NBA. And so therefore, we will most likely not even have a 4.1 or even close to a 4.1 of a defensive rating going forward.
We saw last year the Pistons average, on average last season, allowed 54 points in the paint per game last season. For reference, the Spurs are the only team to average more allowed points in the paint with 56, so right neck and neck for the NBA worst. And another thing is the New York Knicks averaged the least amount of points in the paint with 45 a game, so nearly a 10-point difference per game there between the Knicks at the best and the Pistons with nearly the worst. We saw the Pistons last year, like you said, deal with injuries, and we had length, right? James Wiseman, Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren in the paint last year. But now adding a guy like Asar, I see that average getting better with the points allowed in the paint, because there's three reasons why there can be there's a lot of reasons why there can be scoring in the paint, but three main reasons is we see cutting off of screens or passes. We see fast breaks, reason people score in the paint. And then we see big men getting the ball in the paint and backing down a defender. Well, I think Asar, Monte Morris, he's a sneaky good defender when you watch his film. And then with Jalen Duren, James Wiseman, kind of getting a little bit older, the game slowing down for them, playing a lot of live action games this summer, I see the length of this team really being an advantage for the Pistons. So as far as fast break defense, Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson are going to be able to really hone in on that skill, making sure they get back in the defensive end, get back on defense. And then as far as in the passing lanes off the cutting and the screens and the pick and roll, James Wiseman, Jalen Duren are going to be, with the game slowing down, able to kind of defend that a little bit better this season. So I hope that defensive stats like that, being some of the league's worst in points allowed in the paint, there can kind of grow and get better in that category. And then another reason I think we saw the Pistons kind of be one of the worst teams in the NBA for points allowed in the paint was we saw Isaiah Stewart get exposed a lot in the paint last year. It seemed like in the Revved Up recaps, we just were like, Stu can't seem to guard those opposing bigs on the team. That's why we kind of saw him move to the power forward position. But for me, looking at those stats, those defensive stats, and kind of being like, oh, like the Pistons got exposed a lot last year, I see a glimmer, a big glimmer of light heading into this season with the Pistons' young big men.
Yeah, it's just a lack of experience, really, what it comes down to. Stewart, his rookie year was fantastic. He's not a bad player, because obviously if you look at his rookie year, he was defending bigs left and right, and he had no issues. He was guarding some of the best in the league early on, and he had no issues there at all. What I really think it is the fact that last year was just not a good year for the Pistons. Just as a whole, really. You lose Cade early on for the whole season. Then you have some new guys like Bojan Bogdanovic got thrown into the mix after trading away Kelly Olynyk, Saban Lee, and some other pieces right there alone. Those two guys added pretty good depth and allowed Stu to be who he was, and allowed other big men on our team to be who they are. But then when you have more guys coming in with just a whole big mix with Bagley, James Wiseman, Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren, it's kind of hard to really play your best when you're losing minutes left and right. So Stu obviously had to deal with Marvin Bagley, Isaiah Livers, and Jalen Duren there. And Jalen Duren early on didn't even start. He came off the bench. He was averaging, 12, 15 minutes a game coming off the bench, and he was really impressing. And that's what you kind of saw as a disadvantage for Stu, was the fact that you have Duren walking in there, and it looks like he's a primed veteran out there just defending the best players in the league, and he looks like an absolute stud. And then you have Stewart check back into the game, and you're like, oh, what the heck is going on? And it's not necessarily that Stu is playing that bad or he's playing poorly. It's just when you look at Duren, he's flying all over the place, and he looks like just an absolute beast out there. And then you throw Stu, who is a beast at times, back into that same role. It's kind of hard to compare the two because they're two totally different players, but then also it's a little bit of a disadvantage for Stu and others in that sense, just given the fact of playing time alone. But that's not going to be an issue this year. Realistically, when it comes down to is you had Monty during media day saying that everybody is going to fight for their spot on the team. So that doesn't even mean just bigs alone. That means guards. Everyone is going to fight for a spot on this team going forward. And if you're not doing good, well, guess what? You're not going to see the floor. And that's what it comes down to. That's what Chuck Daly did with the Bad Boys. If you didn't work your tail off or buy into the system, he wasn't going to play you. And that's not a flack or a knack per se on who you are as a person or who you are as a player. It's just at the end of the day, he's going to put the best people out there that's going to win the games. And so with this whole new mindset that Monty just threw out there, already off rip during media day, I can see that playing a large effect into Stu stepping up his game once again, but then all these other players just stepping up their game to a whole new level because they're not wanting to be out of the league.
I got an analogy for everybody, so everybody stick with me here. The perfect recipe for spaghetti involves, the stringy noodles, the spaghetti sauce, the sprinkle of a little cheese on top. I think Troy Weaver might have the perfect recipe here for a tough, stout defense. He's gotten all the ingredients. He's got Killian Hayes, who we know can be a menace in the passing lane. We got Asar Thompson, that's uber athletic, can protect the rim, but also be a menace on the on-ball defense. We got James Wiseman with the crazy wingspan. We got Jalen Duren, who's great, can guard the 1 through 5 position. With these guys on the court together defensively, is that the perfect recipe to attempt to shut down offenses like the Bucks and the Memphis Grizzlies and the Boston Celtics?
Well, you have to have a lot of key guys defensively. When you look at the Boston Celtics as an example last season, even with Marcus Smart, I love Marcus Smart, one of the best guards in the league, easily. But when you look at what he did for Boston there, he was a defensive menace. There's a reason why he won Defensive Player of the Year. There's not a lot of guards that do it, but he's one of them. And just the fact that they traded him away. You add in Drew Holiday, who is in himself a good defensive player. It's a little bit of a disadvantage because Drew doesn't have the offensive ability that a guy like, I literally just said his name, Marcus Smart. Yeah, so Marcus Smart is better offensively than Drew Holiday is. Drew Holiday is better defensively than Marcus Smart is. That's a bold take, I know, but I'm saying it. But when you look at what these teams have come together as in with their offseason adjustments, I guess you could say, with the moves of adding in a Drew Holiday, a good vet, and then adding in Damian Lillard, who is by far one of the best guards in the NBA today. When you add those two new aspects to these teams that are just beasts in the East, I think with the players we have developed and just everybody coming together and just the chemistry going forward, I think we can easily compete with anybody in the NBA. And realistically, I do think that. Now the Warriors, whole nother story. That really is a whole nother story. But if we're talking strictly the East, I think everybody in the East right now, from a defensive standpoint, we can compete with. Offensively, it may be a little rough at times. Because, again, Boston, you add Drew Holiday in. Jason Tatum is already a great defender as is. Robert Williams is great. Well, he's not there anymore. He's in Portland now.
Mm-hmm.
Forgot about that.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you have all these defensive pieces in Boston. You have all these defensive pieces in Milwaukee, because Giannis is not a bum on defense.
Mm-hmm.
But from a whole offensive side of things, we will struggle a little bit at times. But defensively, we can compete with anybody in the East.
And I'm not necessarily, I see Killian in the starting lineup. I just mean in that, like, you know, right when you get around that 6-minute mark in the first quarter, that's when we're going to see guys like Killian come in for Jaden Ivey, for example, and then maybe Asar, Wiseman, Duren play that whole first quarter. We saw that a lot last season. I just see that those 4 guys in particular, like, they have such unique defensive niches that Asar goes head to head with Jason Tatum, and and then Jaden Ivey Cade goes up against Jaylen Brown, for example. Asar, James Wiseman, Jalen Duren able to go up against Al Horford and whoever they have at power forward, whoever that is. I just see us being able to match up well with those teams. And I think that's so crucial, because if you want to make it out of the East and play teams like the Golden State Warriors, like the Memphis Grizzlies, like the Sacramento Kings, you need to get past the Boston Celtics. And then you talk about the Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis at power forward and Brook Lopez there. We talked about last season when we traded for James Wiseman, we really wanted to see what James and Jalen were like as a tandem, as a duo in the paint. And because we need to be able to compete with 2 big men like Giannis and Lopez. And I think we're going to be able to match up well. And then you put Asar up against Chris Middleton. The Milwaukee Bucks have had the Pistons number for the last, really, since Giannis has been around. They whoop up on us every time we play them. It's always brutal. But I think this is the team that can really combat superstar teams like the Bucks, like the Celtics, even the New York Knicks. I think they're going to be pretty solid this year, even though they'll never win a championship in our lifetime.
Never.
They're always going to be like that, like playoff caliber team, but never can make that hump. I think the Pistons are vamping and ramping up their roster in a way that we're going to be able to get past that hump. And it's just kind of exciting to me because, you know, even when we were making the playoffs with Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond and Tobias Harris back in 2018, 2019 years as the 8th seed, you could just kind of tell, like, they just didn't have it defensively. Like, they just didn't have that oomph behind it. Where this team, it's like, man, I think this is the kind of defense the Pistons are going to have, where they're going to get those big defensive plays, and it just surges the Pistons. It really seems like it's vamping up and building that way.
Yeah, historically speaking, throwback to Chuck Daly. What was his system? Defense, rebounding, and toughness. That's the Pistons' bread and butter. That's in our DNA. That's who we are. And Monty said in his introductory press conference, I want to restore Detroit to who they were. Troy Weaver, staple.
Yeah.
Both of them have both said in media day or in the introductory conference alone, this is who we are, this is who we're going to be, this is what we want to do this upcoming season, and we're going to see that. Because these guys that they've built and just brought together as a whole, like Asar Thompson easily could guard Giannis, honestly. He probably could. Asar Thompson could lock up Damian Lillard. That's a bold take, but I don't think it is either. But there's just a couple of these guys on our team that just are lockdown defenders. Like, probably our best 2 lockdown defenders is Asar and Jalen Duren, by far, no questions asked.
Yeah.
But man, I'm just excited for this upcoming season. When you look at who we are defensively, like, there's no denying that we are one of the best defensive teams in the league, and we haven't even stepped foot on the court this upcoming season.
Yeah, I can't wait for the Pistons to be able to prove it. And I mentioned it, I hit on it a little bit earlier in the episode. I talked about how Jalen Duren, I believe, can really guard all 5 positions. We saw him have to go up against, at times, just on the pick and roll for the Cavs, him have to go up against Darius Garland and have to hold his own, not get his ankles broken, not get twisted up in the dribbling. And we saw him be able to rise to the occasion many times. We were talking about in Revved Up recaps how we just loved the way Jalen Duren was able to move on defense. I think hopefully with the game slowing down to him, he'll be able to hone in on that. But Ryan, I know you're a stats guy. I look over to your notes every once in a while, and I see a couple stats there. Is there any stats you want to hit on specifically?
Oof, I don't know. Sometimes I'm very stat ridden, where I have there were a couple episodes where I did have 11 pages of stats, but today I only have 1 page, and I really don't actually have stats on there. It's just more of a mindset, really. Just the mindset that I want this team to identify as going forward is toughness, defense, and rebounding. Yeah. That's what I want. It's a key staple in the Detroit Lions right now with grit. Like, look at who they are. If you buy into the system, you will win. That's really what it is. I don't care if you may not have the highest end players in the league. If you buy into the system and just work your tail off, good things happen. It always does. And so this upcoming season, if we buy into what Troy Weaver's preaching, if we buy into what Monty Williams is preaching, if we buy into anybody on Monty's staff and what they're preaching, if we're buying into what the physical trainers are preaching, if we buy into all the little things, I think going forward, this team will be the next great Pistons team to come out. And I think if we can just build on that, just the little things here and there, I think we will become another high-end dynasty in the NBA to come.
Yeah, I definitely think Monty Williams is the kind of guy that can rally the players and get them to buy into the system, because he's not just knowledgeable, he's personable, and you can tell that he's very charismatic towards the players, and that's really what's going to pull in these high character young guys, is the moral code that Monty carries himself with in the gym, on the plane, when they're traveling, or when it's in his office in the facility. One thing that we talked about a lot last season when doing Revved Up recaps was we had a feeling that the Pistons, with this young team, struggled with communication at times, whether it's just saying, hey, I got your back on this pick and roll, whether it's switching players and switching defenders. I really hope that's something Monty is coaching this season in training camp and in the facility, because I really felt like it hindered this Pistons team a lot. So defensively, I really want them to be able to focus in on the communicating. And I think the issue will be fixed a little bit just with Cade coming back. We saw him in just his rookie year start to be the vocal leader that really was alongside Stewart that season, that really just helped out on being vocal, communicating on the court. And then he gets injured last season, and we just kind of saw that disappear. And then also, I want to see that from Jalen Duren. I want to see if he steps into that vocal leader on the defensive end, because last year that was just rookie Jalen Duren. That was him getting used to the gear that the NBA has as far as speed. Now he's kind of getting within himself, and I really want to see where he takes this team and whether he leads from the top, or if he kind of showing that maybe he's not the vocal leader we thought. I hope that he blossoms into this guy that's very not necessarily play style of Big Ben, though I think there's similarities, but the vocal leader that Big Ben was, not just when the big bright lights are on, but in the gym too. So I'm looking forward to seeing who turns into these vocal leaders on this young Pistons team, because we saw guys like Bojan not really step up in that role last season.
And I will say this, no disrespect to Dwayne Casey, because we absolutely love you. But I think this year is going to be a little bit different and a little bit more helpful in the sense of who we brought in. We brought in former players in our coaching staff. Monty Williams knows the game of basketball. He played in the NBA. He knows what good communication looks like. Jarrett Jack knows what good communication looks like. These guys they know how the NBA works and how it runs and how good teams, what they do and what they don't do. And so this upcoming season, communication-wise, I think you have Monty talking to the bigs and talking to the wings and going like, hey, this is what you need to do and switch off ball screens and yada, yada. And then Jarrett Jack is going like, hey, you got to fill the lane. You just got to do it. Anything, really. I think these two guys alone bring a whole new dynamic, not just from just a coachability standpoint, but the fact that they've been in the NBA themselves. They've gone through everything that you could possibly go through and then some. And so they know what it takes. And just the communication side of things alone, I think we drastically improve in that department just because of the experience of former NBA vets in Monty Williams and Jarrett Jack alone.
So as far as, we talked about the coaching perspective and what guys like Jarrett Jack and Monty is addressing with the team. Do you think defense is what they're preaching the most? What, if you're put in Monty's shoes, what's your number one priority of preaching to this young Pistons team? Is it the defensive end? Is it the passing on offense? Is it the team chemistry? If you're put in his shoes, what are you thinking?
I think it's defense, realistically.
Yeah.
Just the whole breakdown as a whole, offensively, we're perfectly fine. We have guys who can go out there and score. Cade can get a bucket anytime he wants. Jaden can cut to the lane and cut to the rim anytime he wants. Duren is just, once you have an opportunity to take a shot, he's going to take that shot. We have guys offensively that can just easily go off at any point in time. Like Alec Burks dropped 60 with the Knicks. I'm sure if he wanted to, could drop 60 with us too. But defensively, if you think about it, that's our weakest link. That's where we need to work on the most. And chemistry, that just comes with the whole perspective alone and just continuing to practice day in and day out with each other. That's just going to come and go. It's not one of those things that you can truly work on. It's just one of those things that just happens along the way. It's something natural that occurs. But defensively, that's what I really think the focus is this offseason. I think we have one more roster spot open on our team for this upcoming season. Weaver was asked about that during media day, what he's planning on doing with it. He has no idea still. I really think he does know what he's going to do with it and just is not going to be like, oh yeah, I want that guy. No, he has a plan, and I think it's defensively because this offseason you add in Monte Morris, you add in Joe Harris. They can both facilitate, they can both shoot. We need another defender on this team, and that's what's going to take our next jump. But I really think defensively that's what we're going with right now.
Yeah, I agree that defense should be your top priority if I'm the coach, because on any given night, some shots on the offensive end just don't fall. Sometimes you just have bad shooting nights. Those are going to happen. But defense is an effort thing. It's something that you can be taught and that is just drilled into your head. And I think that if that's something you're preaching each and every day, this effort thing, this communication thing defensively, that's something you can control. You can control where your body is on the defensive end. Some nights shots are just not going to fall. This is a scoring league. Guys know how to score. That's why they're in the NBA. Let them do their thing. Sure, there's going to be some offensive schemes, but as far as number one priority in training camp, in the practice facility, is controlling your body, making sure you're in the right spots on the defensive end. I think that's so crucial. One last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up episode number 49 is last season during Revved Up recaps, we talked a lot about how the Pistons couldn't get stops in the late stretches of games. We saw us go up against teams like the New York Knicks and not be able to stop Julius Randle in the last 6 minutes of fourth quarters, or go up against the Orlando Magic and not be able to slow down guys like Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner to make those pushes for leads in the late fourth quarter. I think that, I don't know if it's a conditioning thing. I don't know if it's an effort thing that guys just get down on themselves in the late stretches of games. Like, I don't know if it's a mental thing. or if it's a scheme thing that we saw with Dwayne Casey. But I think that's something Monty should kind of prioritize a little bit too, as far as game planning for training camp. Maybe these 6-minute fourth quarter drills where, the guys are coming into a drill and they're down by 7 points with 6 minutes left on the clock, and they have to find a way to get the lead. The starters do. I don't know if that's what it looks like, but I think that's something that needs to be addressed for this Pistons team to take the next step in the East, in the Eastern Conference. That could have been just a young thing. The guys were young. We're dealing with a lot of young 20-year-old guys. That could have been just the case, but I'm thinking that the Pistons are going to have to get a little bit better in closing games defensively for them to win more than 16 games.
Yeah, what I think it comes down to is the lack of experience, just how young they are in general last year, and not really being put in those situations to really win. And last year too, we didn't have as good of depth as we do now. It's a fair assessment. When you add in 2 very high-end vets, Monte Morris and Joe Harris alone, that's another example. I think what really came down to is the last couple of years, all these rosters coming into each and every season have been thrown together at the last second. But now we have a foundation off of last year going into this year, going like there's a lot of the same guys. And so I think when it comes down to it, I think they do practice these 4-minute drills and whatnot in practice. There's no way you don't practice that realistically. But what it really came down to was lack of experience. I really think that's what it is. And then not having as good of depth as you do now. Depth and lack of experience, I think really what it was. But I think lack of experience easily fixed. All these young guys that were struggling at times during those closing game situations and opportunities now have more experience, know how to handle that situation.
Right.
The depth situation. You have Monte Morris and Joe Harris coming in, but then you also have Killian Hayes, Marvin Bagley, James Wiseman, etc., developing their game to another level. So everybody, I think, is taking a step in the right direction, and I think that's going to be fixed for this upcoming season. And also, I don't think there's no way Troy Weaver and Monte Morris are preaching defense and everything and returning to the bad boy, going to work Piston era, and then not following it up. There's no way. So I think this year we're going to be fine closing games out. I mean, at times, you're still going to see the young side of our Pistons team and who we are. But with the depth and the experience, I think we will see fewer games where we will lose, which we shouldn't have lost. Like, there's no way, like the Wizards games in which you had somebody flying off the side and just lobbing it up there, and it goes in at the last second. First off, we could have defended that, but we didn't. But that's one of those things that you can easily fix. And so I think going forward, we will not lose as many games as we should, but we will close out games.
That will do it for episode number 49. We talked about how the Pistons can be dominant on the defensive end this upcoming season. Before you guys leave, I want to make sure you guys like and subscribe and push that post notifications button also. You guys might be wondering, wow, they got a beautiful studio where they record. Well, that is thanks to Campfire Coworks. Make sure to go follow them on every social media platform. They are an office sharing space here in Marquette, Michigan, and they are a place where you can connect with fellow business owners, find a new employer, and just network in the business community here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So shout out to Campfire Coworks. They are a great host. Thank you guys for viewing, liking, and subscribing. We will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.